Good afternoon. You are welcome for the inaugural lecture of Dr. Professor Daniel Parker. And now you can be seated. Thank you.
A very good afternoon, distinguished guests, Professor Mayekiso, Professor Miyiwa, Professor Ndiko. We're really delighted by your presence at this auspicious occasion of the Professorial Inauguration of Professor Dan Parker, Professor of Biology in the School of Biology and Environmental Sciences, and the UMP Oppenheimer Research Chair in Biodiversity Conservation. This professorial inauguration stands testament to the excellence at the University of Mpumalanga. It highlights the importance of research, teaching and learning and engagement, true scholarship, and the role of universities in shaping the future, and especially here at UMP. The title of Professor Parker's inaugural address is "A Single Bracelet Does Not Jingle, Contemplating the Power of the Collective." Professor Parker's address will focus on the contextual pressures that compel humanity to collaborate for interdisciplinary solutions, given the urgency of environmental decline. He will further elucidate on how his career has been dedicated to understanding and addressing these types of challenges through a combination of ecological research, community engagement, and cross-sector collaboration. Drawing on selected case studies, he will illustrate the principle of the collective is integral to achieving meaningful conservation outcomes and emphasizes that biodiversity conservation cannot be achieved through isolated and selfish efforts. It requires networks of practitioners, researchers, communities, and policymakers working in concert. Colleagues, the impact of Professor Parker's work has been widely acknowledged, and today we celebrate his achievements. It's my honor to introduce the Vice-Chancellor of University of Mpumalanga, Professor Thoko Mayekiso, to please continue and deliver welcome remarks. Professor Mayekiso.
Sanibonani. Sanibonani. Dumelang. Ausheni. Loshani, Loshani, Dimasiare, Molweni, Goeienaand, good afternoon, Namaste. It is an honor and a privilege for me to welcome you to this special and auspicious occasion, the Professorial Inauguration Lecture to be delivered by Professor Dan Parker. Professor Parker was appointed as an Associate Professor in Ecology with effect from the 1st of July 2016 and was promoted to full professor in the School of Biology and Environmental Sciences at the University of Mpumalanga with effect from the 1st of February 2023. So actually we're not late. I would like to extend special welcome to the following. Professor Tenjiwe Meyiwa, the incoming Vice-Chancellor. You are welcome. Professor Dan Parker, our guest of honor, Usingaye. You know what that means? It translated, the one who is the reason of our presence here today. Usingaye. Dan, let me start by congratulating you for being the first chairholder of the UMP Oppenheimer Chair in Biodiversity Conservation. We have high expectations for the contribution the chair will make to science and society. I would like to extend special words of welcome to Professor Parker's family, to Professor Rick Bernard, the first incumbent of the position of DVC academic at UMP, a very dear colleague of ours, and a PhD supervisor for Dan Parker. Professor Ndiko Ludidi, the Dean of the Faculty of Agriculture and Natural Sciences, members of MENCO present here, members of eMenCo, heads of schools, I've seen some around here. We have special guests from Penryn College, from the Cape Leopard Trust, from the Southern African Wildlife Management Association, from Sun Parks and Rhodes University. That's where we recruited Dan from. Academic and support staff, as well as ladies and gentlemen. This is indeed a prestigious and special occasion for the entire community of the University of Mpumalanga and beyond. Thank you for taking time to share this day with us. The University of Mpumalanga, as part of its pioneering journey, Luhambo Loemhlasandlela, has taken its place steadily and steadfastly alongside other universities. Whilst having ample opportunities as a new university to innovate and be visionary, UMP has the inescapable responsibility to tap into some of the traditions of universities, such as the delivery of professorial inauguration lectures. The rite of passage to become a professor in a university has for hundreds of years included the test of having to profess. That's why we talk about a professor. You have to profess one's knowledge to fellow academics and the lay audience. Indeed, the origins of the title professor come from the need to profess or declare publicly one's knowledge. The professorial inauguration lectures are intended to signify that UMP is taking its rightful place amongst institutions that acknowledge and celebrate scholars who have excelled, thereby showing endurance, vision, resilience, and tenacity. The presentation of a professorial inaugural lecture is a significant milestone in the academic career of a full professor and provides a platform to share brilliant discoveries, innovative ideas, and deep insights with the academic community and the public. This lecture will provide Professor Parker a platform to share past research and allow us to peep into present and future research. He will be sharing with us his achievements in research, innovation, teaching, and engagement, and showcase the impact of his academic endeavors nationally and internationally. The idea is for the professor to share his academic journey in a language that is accessible to all, including those of us not coming from his discipline. As a psychologist, I must understand your lecture, Dan. The title of the inauguration address is "A Single Bracelet Does Not Jingle, Contemplating the Power of the Collective." We look forward as the UMP community and our valued friends to listen to Professor Parker profess his knowledge of ecology on this special day. Over the past 9 years, we have witnessed Professor Parker's commendable commitment to advance the vision of the University of Mpumalanga to be an African university, leading in creating opportunities for sustainable development through innovation. Professor Parker, as a C2 NRF-rated scientist, has proved himself to be an accomplished scholar in mammalian terrestrial ecology, human-wildlife conflict, terrestrial biodiversity conservation in relation to mammalian wildlife species. I know, my dear colleague. Prof. Parker, thank you for embodying the values of the University of Mpumalanga: excellence, integrity, diversity, collaboration, adaptability, relevance, and inspiration. Thanks for the contribution to the pioneering journey, Luhambo Lwemsasandlela. As the founding head of School of Biology and Environmental Sciences, Professor Parker has from inception in 2018 been the theme driver of the institutional research theme on biodiversity conservation and development. Thank you for the transformational research leadership that we witnessed during the launch of the UMP Oppenheimer Chair of Biodiversity and Conservation. And thank you for your contribution to internationalization at UMP, including internationalization at home. You know what I'm talking about. We celebrate wholeheartedly the outstanding contribution you have made to your discipline, and we welcome you to the UMP Professoriate. May this be a meaningful and memorable occasion for all of us. Thank you.
Madam Vice-Chancellor, members of MENCO and IMENCO, distinguished guests, colleagues, and our students, good afternoon. Professor Daniel Parker is a member of the School of Biology and Environmental Sciences in the Faculty of Agriculture and Natural Sciences at the University of Mpumalanga. He is a wildlife biologist and a passionate teacher who embraces the need for a firm understanding of theory in a manner well balanced with the crucial ability to practically apply the knowledge towards solving challenges in biodiversity conservation. His excellence in academic leadership within the areas of African mammalian and vertebrate ecology, linked with conservation biology, bears testament for him being the UMP Oppenheimer Research Chair in Biodiversity Conservation, which was launched in the UMP's conservation building on the West Campus earlier today. Prof. Parker's academic impact is evident from the fact that to date, he has graduated master's and PhD students to a total of at least 40 postgraduates. From his research work in terrestrial ecology, Prof. Parker has authored books, book chapters, scientific articles, and technical reports to a total of at least 220 publications, which speaks to his C2 rating, and presented in many national and international conferences. He is one of only 3 South African researchers among the top 49 global co-authors in the field of human-wildlife conflict, interaction, and coexistence. Among his many academic leadership roles, Prof. Parker is the editor-in-chief for the African Journal of Wildlife Research, and that's just one out of many. Today, Prof. Parker will show that biodiversity conservation cannot be achieved through isolated efforts, but requires networks of practitioners, researchers, communities, and policymakers working in concert to ensure biodiversity conservation. Prof. Parker.
Madam Vice-Chancellor, Madam Vice-Chancellor, Deputy Vice-Chancellors, special guests, several of you are in the room and those of you online, academic colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to start by making sure that the technology works, and it does. The late American naturalist E.O. Wilson once said, "Biology is the science of the 21st century." Of course, as a completely unbiased biologist, I agree wholeheartedly. But joking aside, let's just take a step back for a moment and consider some of the world's most pressing challenges. Global disease pandemics, climate change, food and water insecurity, pollution, and we could go on and on and on. But many, if not all, of these current global challenges are linked to what some have called rampant human population growth. In Africa alone, the UN estimates that the human population is set to at least double in the next half century. So that's from about 1.5 billion people to about 3.2 billion people. And like many of my students, I struggle to get my head around these sorts of numbers because they are really, really big. And with big numbers come probably even bigger headaches. Where will all these people live? Where's their food going to come from? Where will their water come from? Where does all the waste go? And of course, what can we do about this? So throwing our hands up in the air and saying, like my son does, IDK, is, well, in my view, not an option. And this is where I believe biology can come in. I don't think there's one silver bullet or quick fix, but I do believe that we have to start somewhere and tackle these grand challenges in the same way that one might eat an elephant, one bite at a time. In my lecture this evening, I'm going to attempt to take a few metaphorical bites out of this elephant by using research that I've been involved in to hopefully provide some inspiration for action and impact. But before I launch into full inaugural monologue, I want to pause for a moment and just reflect and acknowledge the crucial roles played, not paid, well, maybe paid in some instances, by many people and organizations that have gotten me to where I am today. First, my funders and in-kind sponsors over the years. Without your support, much of my research would not have been possible. Second, to my institution and to Chris for this wonderful photograph, for its role in my academic progression. I'd also like to give a shout out to my friends and colleagues from both within and outside of my school. You know who you are. Some of you are in the audience and some of you are at home listening online. For all of your friendship and support, and certainly for making the daily grind that much more worth it. Thank you. Next, my family. Growing up with three brothers and being number 3 in the pecking order, so to speak, was not always straightforward. So from life-threatening lifts on bike handlebars, Carl, all the way to the Rondebolt Bird Sanctuary, to seemingly never-ending road trips in the indomitable 1300 Ford Escort, to sharing each other's happiness at our respective weddings and the arrival of children. Thanks, Butz, I appreciate it. Thank you too to the rest of my family village, my parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, nieces, nephews, parents-in-law, sisters and brothers-in-law, and of course, to my absolutely exceptional wife, Andy, and my 2 children, Keegan and Matthew, who are here tonight. I love you. However, this evening, I'd like to dedicate my lecture to the memory of my hero and my biggest supporter, who couldn't be here, my mom. On the academic side of things, I owe much of my success, initially and beyond, to my teachers and later colleagues in the Department of Zoology and Entomology at Rhodes University. These people were instrumental in shaping me as a scientist and my overall scientific thinking. If you look carefully, you might even spot a UMP staff member and student or two in that image, other than me, of course. That was taken just before Prof. Mayekiso poached me from Rhodes University. But chief shaper of thinking and fellow coffee connoisseur is my mentor, Rick Bernard, who's here this evening. Thanks, Rick. So despite having to endure, it's a very recent photograph, as you can tell. So despite having to endure my best efforts at trying to wreck his field vehicle, making him slave over an open fire to make toast for breakfast, and pretending to enjoy my company during fieldwork. Rick remained steadfast and supervised my third-year research report, one of my honours projects, and both my master's and my PhD. Now that's commitment. His knowledge, guidance, and friendship are hugely appreciated. Thanks, Rick. Of course, where would I be without this lot, my students? Both past and present, many of whom are here this evening, both in person and online. I think there's probably more online so that they can keep themselves hydrated than in the audience. But I'd like to thank each and every one of you. I'm extremely lucky because although I only have 2 biological children that I know about, I have many, many more academic children, and these are my students. You're all a source of inspiration to me and give me endless joy when you succeed. Although I don't have time to mention each of you by name, I do want to mention one very special academic child, and I think she's going to get a fright. Dr. Jessica Cumley, who's listening online with some other colleagues of mine. I first met Jess when, as a high school scholar, I unashamedly stole that photograph from social media. She visited our department to find out what zoology was all about. She successfully navigated her somewhat anonymous first and second years at university, and then decided to pursue her third-year project under my supervision. Her research report was on the diversity and abundance of ticks that could be found on the backsides of her dad's cattle. Cool project. I must have done a reasonable job because she then pursued one of her master's dissertations with me as her supervisor. And this time, she was interested in finding out what putting a fake snake on a public road would do to driver behavior. These are the sorts of projects we do in my lab, just saying. Jess then decided to complete her master's, and this was on the ecology of brown hyenas at the Mountain Zebra National Park. She then followed that up, so she still wasn't sick of me, with her PhD on the ecology and coexistence of large carnivores in Salati Game Reserve. Jess has since gone on to be a hugely successful scientist in her own right, and is currently the Impact and Effectiveness Manager for the Conservation Landscapes Institute. Certainly, I can certainly say that I'm one proud academic dad. Well done, Jess. Now, I'd like to begin by going back in time and to give you a laugh with some of the older photographs. For as long as I can remember, I've been absolutely infatuated with animals, and African wildlife in particular. I, like many others, have been seduced by their mythical power, and examples of my affairs with these charismatic species abound both in my formative and subsequent work. From studying the feeding habits of giraffes with the blue bomber in the background there, to the impacts of elephants on vegetation, to the apex of the food chain by being fortunate enough to participate in lion research spearheaded by the internationally renowned Wildlife Conservation Research Unit's Andrew Loveridge, shown in the picture there, collaring that female. It was these academic affairs, if you will, that fueled my passion for wildlife research and provided the genesis of the work that I'll be discussing this evening. But I think it's no longer time to reminisce. And Keegan, isn't there a song that says we've got to get down to business? Huh? So let's get down to business. In my lecture this evening, I'm going to use 4 examples from my research to demonstrate how harnessing the collective, be it for species recovery addressing human-wildlife conflict, or community engagement, or land use change. All of this is essential for addressing some of our major and most pressing conservation challenges. And I'm going to start by using 2 examples of African wild dog research that I've been involved in. Now, the conservation story of African wild dogs is frighteningly, I always trip on that word, similar to almost all other carnivores around the world. They were once widely distributed on the African continent, but their numbers have steadily and significantly declined over time, making them Africa's second most threatened carnivore after the Ethiopian wolf. Now, if we zoom into the last recognized stronghold for wild dogs in South Africa, the iconic Kruger National Park, just down the road, we can see that from 435 adult dogs in 45 packs in 1995, that's every single one of those 435 dogs there, their numbers declined to 132 adult dogs in 20 packs in 2009. Now, although their numbers have since increased in the Kruger, as a species and across Africa, they remain in a precarious position. Why is this? Well, quite simply, the landscape surrounding many of Africa's protected areas have changed and continue to change. And this change is probably best depicted by this image on the screen. Just as an example, there are about 3.6 million people living on the outskirts of southern Kruger. And it's estimated that there are 4.5 million people within 35 kilometers of the western boundary of the Kruger. So with people in these kinds of numbers and in such close proximity to a protected area comes the inevitable: conflict between people and the wildlife. For wild dogs, this often means increased exposure to disease, increased chances of being caught in wire snares, fragmented habitats due to fences, and an increased likelihood of being killed on the road and becoming roadkill. So what can we do about this? That's pretty bleak and everybody's starting to look sad. So what can we do about this? Enter some of the research led by my postdoc, Courtney Marnowick, who assessed the overall success of artificially formed wild dog packs outside of the Kruger National Park in what is known as the managed metapopulation. So basically, these are smaller protected areas that can accommodate wild dogs, but still need some human-mediated management for them to persist. And Courtney found that a reduction in the number of days that these packs spent in a pre-release boma or enclosure was one of the key factors driving the pack's subsequent success when they were released. The less time the animals spend in a boma, the more likely it will be that the pack will succeed when it's released. Through this work, Courtney was able to provide reserve managers with tangible guidelines for how long packs of variable group sizes should be kept in a boma prior to their release. All really boring for non-biologists. However, probably the most important outcome of Courtney's work is that it demonstrates the collaborative nature of wild dog conservation, not conversation. By pooling insights from many translocation events across multiple reserves, the work demonstrates improved success rates for all involved. I would argue that this is then a tangible example of how interdisciplinary teamwork and shared learning can contribute to a species recovery challenge. Now let's return to the Kruger National Park, but still sticking with wild dogs. You saw this map a little earlier, and this is a map that was generated by one of my first master's students Jess Watermeyer, the one doing her best wild dog impression in the picture on the right. Part of Jess's master's was to investigate the attitudes of communities along the western and southern boundaries of the Kruger, within the buffer zone shown on the map, that's the brown area. In essence, she was trying to gauge the tolerance of these communities to wild dogs when they dispersed outside of the park. Jess found that most respondents were positive about wild dogs, had a pretty good knowledge of the species, and were generally happy to have them on their properties. And these sorts of findings really underscore that the conservation landscape beyond park borders is often determined by social cohesion and collective tolerance amongst people. Therefore, even in a wide-ranging species like the wild dog, it can potentially recover if local communities jointly decide to accommodate it. Moreover, Jess's work highlights the importance of engaging communities, building networks of landowners as a unified force to reduce human-wildlife conflict outside of protected areas. Indeed, it is outside protected areas where human-wildlife conflict is at its highest, and where the need for meaningful community engagement is crucial for positive outcomes. So our next stop on our trip this evening is to move north of South Africa to the Cholocho communal lands just south of Hwange National Park in Zimbabwe. Hwange National Park is Zimbabwe's largest protected area, roughly the size of Belgium. And inside the park live a thriving population of these guys, lions. However, unlike many of the protected areas we have here in South Africa, Hwange is not fenced, resulting in scenes such as these, a lose-lose situation for both the community and the lions. So, together with colleagues from Oxford, I recruited my then honours student, Tim Caper, who is, as you can see, since gone on to be a highly accomplished academic in his own right, to try and figure out what the cattle herds were doing in the Cholocho communal lands and how this might be linked to human-lion conflict in the area. Tim analysed spatial data from 14 randomly selected cows that were collared across 14 villages along the national park boundary. In addition, Tim also included data on all instances where lions had killed livestock in the area. And this was between 2008 and 2012. The data showed that lions killed more cattle in the mid to late wet season. So those are the months between January and April, compared to the dry season between the months of May and September. Now, this is important because when the spatial data of the collared cows was considered together with the maize cropping practices in Cholocho, Tim found that during the wet season, when maize was actively planted and being grown, the cattle were generally herded further away from the homesteads and sometimes into the national park to graze. And this made them more vulnerable to lion attack. By comparison, in the dry season, outside the cropping season, which is the dry season, the cattle tended to be kept closer to the homesteads and were allowed to graze on the remaining maize stalks. That'd be interesting. Making them less vulnerable to lion attack. Based on these results, we suggested that adjustments to seasonal herding practices may assist the communities of Cholocho. Specifically, corralling or as we like to say in South Africa, kraling the cattle at night to reduce lion attacks would probably be one of the most effective techniques. More broadly, though, Tim's work is a good example of how one farm alone may not necessarily be able to solve an issue like conflict with lions, but through a concerted effort by the community and park management, coexistence can be fostered at the landscape scale. Now, let's change gear completely and stop talking about the big and hairies or the big and scaries and talk about bats in agro ecosystems. And thanks to my other professors in agriculture who have very eloquently, much better than I can do, explained what an agro ecosystem is in their professorial inaugurations. But we want to have a look now at how land use changes can affect biodiversity conservation. So for his PhD, my student Vusani Mpete, seen here diligently placing an acoustic bat detector on a fallen tree in northern Kruger, investigated fruit bat behavior on farms in Limpopo. Vusani found that even within lychee orchards, epileted fruit bats overwhelmingly favored native fruiting trees over the lychees. And they also played a key role in dispersing the seeds of these indigenous plants. So, in other words, pockets of native vegetation on lychee farms serve as critical resources for fruit bats, which in turn helps regenerate wild plant populations. So by collaborating with farmers and demonstrating the ecosystem services provided by bats, Vusani was able to show how interdisciplinary collaboration between farmers and scientists can potentially mitigate the ecological impacts of land use change. Now, Vusani also combined exclusion experiments with farmer surveys to test the actual and perceived impacts of bats, birds, and primates, again, in lychee agroecosystems. So contrary to what the farmers believed, vertebrate exclusion, so putting a fence around the lychee trees, led to lower lychee yields. And this was likely due to the loss of insect pest suppression by the bats and the birds. So these findings highlight that perceptions of bats as pests often can conflict with their true ecological role in the system, and that conservation compatible farming can benefit both biodiversity and productivity. Interdisciplinary collaboration and farmer education are therefore essential tools for reconciling agricultural production with biodiversity conservation in South Africa's changing landscapes, in fact. Now, as a professor, I could easily go on and on with example after example, listening to my own voice while my students fall asleep in the audience. However, I'm acutely aware that I'm the second last individual on the program, standing between you and the light refreshments outside. Nevertheless, I hope that the brief journey that I have taken you on this evening through 4 key pieces of research has given you some insight into how crucial it is for us to work together when it comes to solving the world's grand conservation challenges. I do still think that E.O. Wilson was right. Of course, biodiversity is the science of the 21st, biology is the science of the 21st century. But it's up to us to put aside our academic pride and differences and work together as a collective across disciplines to ensure a bright and biodiversity-rich future for our children and our children's children. Thank you.
Esteemed guests, we've been taking through a journey of discovery, of academic excellence, of some emotion, I must say, which I shared with you, and really shared an outstanding academic's contribution to the field and the environment. We want to ask the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Mayekiso, to come forward and join the inaugurated professor over there. And while that is taking place, colleagues, we really, as a university, want to acknowledge profoundly the collaborators and especially the students and the funders that has contributed to this journey of Professor Parker. So colleagues, with this commemoration and the certificate, we're very pleased to present to you Professor Daniel Parker. Congratulations again. It's my honor to ask Professor Mashudu Davana Maselesele, the Deputy Vice-Chancellor responsible for teaching and learning, to conclude our evening. Thank you, Professor.
Good evening. Let me try and see if I can speak many other languages. Dimadekwan. Dumela. Aushen. Molweni. Sanbonan. Huyenand. I've tried it. Watch the space. Before you know it, I'll be speaking Swahili. Honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Vice-Chancellor, Professor Thoko Mayekiso, it is indeed an honor for me to give a vote of thanks this evening. Let me acknowledge Professor Thenjiwe Meyiwa, our incoming Vice-Chancellor. Do you know her? I don't want to ask her to stand. I might be in trouble. But maybe she can wave so you can see her. Thank you. Thank you. It's important. You should know her. Before you know it, she'll find you doing mischief when you don't know. Thank you, Prof. To Menko and Menko, I want to thank you very much for making this evening a success. To the Dean of the faculty, Professor Ndiko, you should be very proud. We are counting the 4th inaugural lecture today, and all of them comes from the Faculty of Agriculture and Natural Sciences. I think we deserve a round of applause. We're doing extremely well. Watch the space. I wonder if Prof. Mini is in here, the head of school. I'm sure he's very proud wherever he is. To all academic staff and support staff, I really want to thank you for availing yourself. You know, in my language, Chivenda, we say, those are not tongues. Chivenda is South African language. What it means is that whenever you sit with the prince and princesses where they are being guided, you who is not part of them, as the fact that you are there, you benefit. So you are not a professor yet, but you're benefiting from what is happening. And grab this with your 2 hands and make sure that before we know it, you'll be flying high and we'll appreciate you. I thought I saw the SRC president and his team. We appreciate you, Mr. Chilwan. Continue doing what you are leading from the front. And all other students who are present this evening, thank you for coming. And to fund us, if you are not here, but you're listening to us, we are saying thank you. Continue to fund UMP because we are here knowing that we are actually for progress. And as you see, we are really progressing. We're not 11 years old, but we are making big progress. We're competing not with our own. We don't compete with our own, we compete with the bigger giants because we are committed to what we do. To our honored guests, the Penryn College, the Cape Leopard Trust, the South African Wildlife Management Association, St. Parks and Rhodes University, we thank you. We appreciate you for coming. We really appreciate the partnership that we have. I'm happy that Rose is not angry at us. That's why they are here. Can we applaud all the guests that have met us? To Professor Parker's family, you know, they always say, behind all successful, I don't want to say behind all successful men, there is a highly committed wife who is supportive. And we can't say the opposite. I don't want to go there to those politics, because in some cases we find that a very successful woman is, you find that there's a very bitter, angry partner. I didn't say that. But behind all successful human beings, there is a family that is very supportive. And that's what I'm saying. And thank you to the family of Prof. Dan. You know, we see his progress. He is able to progress because you are there supporting him, you know, cheering him from behind. We appreciate you. Prof. Dan, they say it takes a village to raise a child. And you have just shown us that indeed it was a village that raised you, that made you who you are. And we appreciate your family for that. To Prof. Rick, you know, I was very fortunate to have met you when I joined this university. And what he said about you, I can also share and say, you have been a mentor to me. Anytime, Prof, I call him, he will be giving me information. And from his fingertips, he will not say, I should give me 30 minutes. And I'll get an email with all the information that I'm asking for. And every time I would feel very guilty. Hi, he has given me a report, but there are still things that I'm going back to ask. He never grumbled, and he always very happy to support. So I understand now that, yeah, you are a true mentor. And we really appreciate what you have done together with your wife, Dr. Penny Barnard. Oh, sorry. Your daughter. I'm so sorry. I was misinformed. Apologies. So indeed, Prof. Rick, you are a true mentor. And we appreciate you as a role model because that's what mentorship is all about. And I think what he has shown is also talking to some of the people who are sitting around that who would know, or, you know, supervision doesn't end after a degree. It goes and continue. So with that, can we applaud him for that? I also want to thank everyone for gracing this occasion. Thank the acting registrar for making sure that we are on time and we follow the rules as she indicates. We appreciate you. We also want to thank the DVC Research, Innovation and Internationalization. Professor Aldo, you're keeping us on our toes. And you are doing a great job, we must say, with your team. We really appreciate you. To our visionary leader, Professor Thoko Mayekiso, you know, we all stand tall, knowing that whatever that we do, we are backed by a visionary who doesn't settle for mediocrity. You should ask Dan. He will tell you the process of promotion was not an easy road. You have to follow and fulfill that which is needed without any compromise. That's when you get to be promoted. So we agree with your excellence, the values of excellence. And we also agree with your luhambo, lwemhlahlandlela. You know, this morning I learned the meaning, the true meaning, the deep meaning of what lemhlahlandlela mean. And that was given by one of the program leaders in social work, who said, it's like, it means going into the bush, not knowing the road. There's no road. Get into the bush to get wood. So I said, oh, Luhambo, Lwemtlahlandlela at UMP. It means, yes, we came into the bush and the real bush. And look at what is happening now. Look at what is happening. The real bush where there were snakes. And that's why there is even training that we should be taught on how to manage ourselves when we see a snake. Now I understand, because now we see that she took up with a team the challenge fearlessly, with all the courage. And look around, you see excellence everywhere. I think we need to applaud her and say, UMP indeed is telling a story of a courageous journey, a fearless one. Thank you, Prof, for your leadership. To Professor Dan Parker, we're saying congratulations. You're making history at UMP. You have made history. And indeed, what you said, that a single bracelet does not jingle. We know, we agree. And according to what you were presenting, yes, we agree. We agree with you that, yes, indeed, for species recovery, you need teamwork. Otherwise, those wild dogs will die continuously. We will not have them. For our cattle to be safe, you need a scientist and a community, a farmer or the community, to ensure that we save our cattle. Because if I have cattle and they got killed by a lion, you can imagine what kind of anger the community will have. Before you know it, the bush will get burnt. Birds, I didn't know that I needed a bird in my farm. So I realized that now, instead of killing them, poisoning them, I will keep them alive. So we are agreeing with you that indeed what you said, it really need us to work together as a team. And with that, Prof, I think I must say congratulations to Professor Dan. He indeed professed on his profession, and we appreciate the work that you've done. Thank you very much. And also to the organizers of this event, I think we need to applaud Professor Dan. We need to. Thank you. Thank you. To organizers of the event, the DVC's team, the registrars division, ICT, photographers, caterers, we want to thank you. You see excellence in everything that we do. This is UMP for you. So on that note, thank you. Thank you to everyone. Even if I've not mentioned your name, thank you very much. Can we give ourselves a round of applause? Now, as we finish this, we will request that we sing we stand up for our national anthem. And after that, we will request the procession to leave the hall. You will still remain standing until the procession has left. We will also invite you to have dinner with you at the next old library building. That's where we are going to interact with Professor Dan. If we don't have a national anthem, we can still stand up and wait for the procession to leave the hall. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much for attending. We are requesting that you can join us in the next old library.